Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us for what should be a really great conversation, this critical conversation that we've organized at RISE. Today, we want to talk about and unpack the role of sport in education and equity, focus specifically on the city of Indianapolis. So we want to look at the role of sport in education and equity in Indianapolis. RISE is a national nonprofit that really looks at race and racism and uses sport as a vehicle, a platform, and a context to have some of these difficult and tough conversations. And we're really excited, truly excited to have a couple partners join with us today to make this possible. So we've partnered with the Ncaa, we've partnered with the Indiana Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, and we've partnered with Butler University. So really excited to have these partners on board joining us for this critical conversation. And we're gonna have a really powerful conversation today with some panelists. And I'll introduce them briefly, but I'll start first by introducing the moderator who's gonna be moderator of that conversation, Mr. Jesse Washington. He's a journalist with The Undefeated. He's also an author. So really excited to have you with us today, Jesse. My name is Dr. Andrew McIntosh. I'm the RISE's VP of Curriculum. So I'm excited to be here. I will be leading you through a bit of an activity on the front end, talking a little bit about equity and equality and what we mean by those concepts. So that's who I am. We have Dr. Derek Gregg, who is the NCAA Senior Vice President of Inclusion. So he's joining us. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. We have Maggie Lewis, who's the CEO of the Indianapolis Boys and Girls Clubs. Thank you for joining us. Corey Mays, former NFL athlete, Notre Dame linebacker as well. So thank you for joining us today, Corey. And we also have Rihanna Walzer, who's a track and field athlete at Butler University. So really excited. Thank you for joining us today. As I said at the top, what I want to do first of all is introduce, RISE a little bit, tell you a little bit more about who we are. And then we want to spend some time thinking and talking about equality versus equity. We want to recognize a number of youth who have joined us today from the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Indianapolis. So we thank you for joining us. And we'll ask, especially the youth, we'll have the panelists chime in, but especially those youth who would like to participate in this activity at the front end. We're really excited to hear your voices and your thoughts as we kind of talk through this activity. So let me say more about RISE, who we are, what we do, and then we'll transition into that activity. RISE truly believes that one day there will be a world without racism. And when we get there, we believe that athletes and sports more broadly would have played a fundamental role in getting us there. RISE sees its role, through our partnerships and we work with a number of stakeholders as truly educating and empowering athletes and the sports community as a whole. So whether it be fans, coaches, administrators, etc., to be champions, to help eliminate racial discrimination, to champion social justice and improve race relations. This pandemic, I think, has really brought into focus a number of things as relates to equality and equity, and a number of conversation around social justice. And so, as we think about our work throughout the hubs and across the country, we really want to have more of these conversations where we are unpacking some of the challenges that face us as a country and are truly leveraging, sports and sports community to help move that forward. So, with that, I'll transition us into our activity on equality versus equity. For the purposes of this exercise, like I said, folks, please feel free to chime in. As we do our work and do our educational work especially, we really believe in having more of a conversation. So I'll throw some questions out to folks. I'm gonna put an image up. I'll ask folks to take, when I ask the questions, then folks can begin to unmute and to chime in. So I want you to unpack the image, kind of look at the image on the left, the image on the right. The one on the left says equality, the one on the right says equity. Want to have some people's thoughts on what they think the difference might be between equality and equity, just given the image that they see before them.
Well, we look to the left. We'll notice something similar on the left that's different from the right. So everybody everybody on the left in the left picture is standing on the box and it all is the same height. But we'll notice that everybody is a different height as far as their height is. So everybody's equal on the left. Everybody got one box, but something is different as far as their perspective.
I think you kicked us off really well. You know, you talked about them having an equal number of boxes. Everybody has one box, but them being different heights, and so having a different perspective. So I really like that. I have some folks in the chat saying, you know, everyone having the same is probably what's going on the left, whereas everybody having what they need is what's going on the right. I also see somebody else saying that there's an assumption that the solution is good for everyone to get the outcome rather than tailoring the solution to get an equal outcome. Yeah, so I think those are some good thoughts. You know, let me see if Dr. Greg, you know, Jesse, any of the other panelists have any thoughts. And again, others can feel free to put their thoughts in the chat.
Yes, I've seen similar illustrations, and I just liken it to sometimes, or a lot of times in life, we're not born with the same things, and some people have a head start in certain areas. So just looking at the height, I've always been tall, so I'm taller than everybody, so I had a head start on that. But when you look at whether it's access to the best schools, whether you were able to get a business loan to build the wealth that some other people have, I think that's what we're getting into when we start talking about true equity and giving everybody an equal playing field when we get back to the sports world.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Greg. Okay, somebody in the chat says, I strongly believe the pictures define fairness. Yeah, I think, you know, fairness for me is one of those great concepts that comes up. And I know we'll unpack some of this when we get to our panel discussion. And as the two images strike me as different ways potentially of going about fairness. One of the quotations I think that really stands out is equality is giving everybody the same pair of shoes, and equity is giving them a shoe that fits. So there is this, I think, tension between what is fair as we approach the situation, and I think equity really underscores the need to focus on outcomes. What is the goal that we're trying to get people to achieve? I think, Corey, you were going to say a little bit more about that. So go ahead now and talk to me about outcomes here as it relates to perspective.
Well, you see on the left, again, everyone has the same box. Everybody has the same thing. And on the right, everybody has what they need in order to enjoy life. So when we think about that, we talk about fairness and equality, but we need to really understand what that means is how does it make your life better? And I think it's very important that we understand the implications long-term when we talk about making something equal, but with it, also make sure that your life is better when it's equal. Because as illustrated on the left, you could be equal, but it's still not good for you. So we have to be very careful and kind of think out the box too, and think long-term about these things.
Yeah, excellent. I wonder what the audience's thoughts, any of the panelists or the wider audience, the youth who in the audience, are around the idea that somebody has to give up something for equity to take place. Because, if we kind of look at these two images, we see, the tallest person on the left, he kind of has to give up, the resources, the box that he's standing on, in order for the shortest person to have enough to achieve the outcome. So just folks' thoughts about, is that always the case? Do people have to give up something? And what might that look like in a real world perspective?
If I could jump in here, Andrew, I think that one of the things that is required for real equity to happen is genuine love and fellowship, in the community. And obviously the person was willing to give up their box, their place of privilege, their advantage in order to help someone who deserved it. And so I think that, love, seeing those with less than, at recognizing that they deserve the same opportunities, that they may deserve help due to what has happened in the past through no fault of their own, is one of the keys. And there's a quote from the former Georgetown basketball coach, John Thompson, that I really love. He said, "Nothing is more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals." So if you're not equal to someone else, but you still get the same treatment, you're still being treated unfairly. That's what I think about in these situations. And people do have to give something up to achieve real equity. And what's required is love and fellowship and understanding.
Yeah, I really like that, Jesse, because one of the things that has particularly struck me, and I think this will segue us nicely into our panel discussion where we get a little bit more focus on education. But one of the things that has really struck me this year with the pandemic and a lot of the virtual education and schooling that's been taking place is that, it's really kind of exacerbated and I think highlighted the differential access that folks have. The differential access that youth have. And if we truly are to believe, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and there's some scholars there who once said, the future of the nation is in the book bags of the children. But if we kind of look at what's happening right now in terms of education, I think there are many youth who are struggling through no fault of their own, but just through the structures and the systems that have been set up and their ability to access those systems and structures. And so we definitely need to consider those who are less fortunate than us, those who need different types of or sets of resources in order to achieve particular outcomes. If education is that great equalizer in our society, or one of the greatest ones for sure, then I think we as a society, we as a country need to do a better job of ensuring that all of us, all of our youth, at any stage of education has the tools, the access, the equipment they need to be successful. Really, really like that quote by you, Jesse. Nothing is more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. Excellent quote, really, really powerful. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for participating in this initial discussion about equality and equity. The goal is for these concepts to really kind of carry through as we enter into our panel discussion. There will be an opportunity, and Jesse will say more here, for you to put your questions in the chat as we go forward. But really excited to hearing more from our panelists as we enter this panel discussion phase of today's proceedings. So thanks again. I'll pass it over to you, Jesse.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Appreciate your participation. Thanks, Dr. McIntosh. Really a great visual presentation of what we're dealing with. So let's get even further into this topic and identify it and wrestle with it because it is pretty difficult. And talking about what is equal and what is inequality. When we see it, how we recognize it, and how we combat it. My name is Jesse Washington. I'm a journalist with the ESPN's The Undefeated. And so I guess, Corey, I'd like to start with you. And how would you define systemic racism? What does that mean to you?
What it means to me, I think the biggest word to keep in mind is power and how you can use power to make sure others are at a disadvantage. So when we think about the way society runs, all the institutions, banks, schools, hospitals, your government, state, local, and federal, the court systems, law enforcement, businesses, companies, big corporations. For so long, there have been certain rules and laws put in place to make sure that other racial groups are getting more of an advantage. I think Dr. Gregg talked about it with getting loans from a bank. Now, you may be able to get a loan, but your loan is going to be a lot higher than, or you'll be denied completely. And I think 2020 with the pandemic has really exposed a lot of lack of resources across the board, across the country, across the world. We talk about schools and we talk about resources, how some school districts are able to go virtual and every kid gets a laptop and every kid gets an iPad and everybody has internet. And then some places it's no resources, no laptops, no internet, no nothing. So when we think about systemic racism, we have to think about that across the board, and it's about power.
That's a great answer. Dr. Gregg, you work for the NCAA. You're in charge of diversity and inclusion. We're talking about thousands of schools and tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of athletes. What are some examples of how you have seen systemic racism at work within the NCAA athletic structure?
Well, a little bit about my background. This is my 27th year in college athletics, and I spent the first 26 years on campuses. the last 14 as an athletic director. So to me, systemic racism, it's a buzzword right now. It's a non-starter with a lot of people. Nobody wants to be branded a racist. So let's just say we'll call it historic exclusion. And one thing that I wrote down that Corey was talking about when he was talking is the word access. And so in college athletics, especially at the highest level, the access point for the hiring of Black head coaches in football in particular is where you look at some of the systemic things or some of the historical exclusion that's occurred right now. And at my alma mater, Vanderbilt, I played football there. They just fired Derek Mason. Now, he had a good run there. He was there 6 years, went to a couple of bowl games, but that lowers the numbers. And I think there were only 14 out of 130 FBS Black head football coaches to begin with. On the athletic director side, there are less numbers than that. When you talk about presidents, maybe 2 or 3 Black presidents on that level as well. And so the access has been denied or cut off over a period of time. And I think we really have to work hard or even harder at getting to that.
What would you say to somebody who says, hey man, you know, sports is a meritocracy. If the coaches aren't getting the job, then maybe they're not the best qualified. What's your response to something like that?
Well, I've been in a lot of those rooms and I've had to make those decisions, and I even put my own career on the line to hire who I thought were the right people. And for people who say that, we have some programs we're working on. There's a pipeline program through the Black AD Alliance. There's some things through the Ncaa that I don't want to reveal right now because we're going to roll them out in the next couple of weeks that will help, I think, nip a lot of that in the bud. I can tell you myself over the summer, since we've had so many Zoom calls, I was on a weekly Zoom call with 500 to 600 coaches of color in football. So every week. And so I know they exist. We just have to make sure that they're prepared and get the right exposure. And that's going to be part of what we're doing going forward.
That's great. My next question is for Maggie Lewis, CEO of the Boys and Girls Club there in Indianapolis. And what are some of the challenges that you see high school athletes facing during this pandemic as a result of systemic racism?
Yeah. So one of the things I want to start with, Hoosiers, like basketball is who we are. It's like knowing your last name. So sports are really important in the state of Indiana. This whole notion of social distancing, how do you practice your sport and social distance? We are teaching our kids about being responsible and scheduling, yet they have these sports schedules that constantly get changed because of COVID, and certain team members cannot show up to the game, so the game is canceled. So there's a lot of frustrations around that. The ability for family members and friends to show up to a game, like we bond around those games, and we're not able to do that and communicate with each other. So those are some of the frustrations that I recognize. I have a 14-year-old freshman who is playing basketball now, and he's constantly complaining about the inability to play the sport and be with his teammates the way they've done in the past.
When you look at the situation for high school athletes and youth there in the state of Indiana, and you think about that picture that we looked at in understanding equality versus equity, how does that photo and the idea of equality and versus equity, how does that affect how you are trying to help young people there in your state?
So let me talk about the picture for just a little bit. When I think about sports specifically, in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of the coaches was asking our kiddos to sign on to their tablets and do these virtual practices and what have you, and make sure your internet is great. Well, a lot of our young folks don't have that access, so they struggle just to be a part and feel like a part of that team, right? So that's a constant frustration for many, and I'm going to be blunt, our Black and our brown kids in our community who often are playing these sports, but again, don't have the tools that they need to truly be successful. Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis, what we've done is try to level the field. We made sure that our kiddos have access to Wi-Fi. We made sure that our kiddos have tablets available to them that they can utilize. We've opened up our space so that young people can come in and get our Wi-Fi. We've upgraded our system in all of our spaces, again, making it easier for our youth to tap into technology.
Dr. Gregg, on the NCAA level, what are some of the ways that inequality can affect the athlete experience on the college level?
Well, it mirrors a lot of what was just said. A lot of the student athletes are experience a lot of different things, challenges along the mental health lines, and just the challenges of COVID itself, not wanting to catch the disease, spread it around the teammates, which affects obviously what's going on within the team. But a big concern when I was at the athletic director at Tulsa just a few months ago was the student athletes, particularly those of color, because we know that it affects our community differently than a lot of others, are really afraid to take it back to their parents. So parents haven't been able to access the games, grandparents in particular. A lot of these student athletes have been on campus since July and have not seen their families, didn't go home for Thanksgiving. Some won't get to go home for Christmas. So those are a lot of the things that they're dealing with. I take my hat off to them because you can't even train in the same way either, even though at least on a campus we have the technology. But still, the student athletes aren't going to class, so they're not having in-person classes. You've seen some colleges who have basically shipped their student athletes off to other states or other cities to try to keep them safe because they can take their classes online. But it's been a big, big challenge. And again, my hat is off to everyone who's helping us get through this and navigate this tough time.
Thank you. I'd like to talk next to Rihanna. She is a track and field athlete at Butler University. Could you begin, Rihanna, by talking about the organization that you have there at Butler and the work that you're doing to address some of these problems that we've seen as a result of inequity and COVID right now? Tell us about your organization and what it's doing to address these issues.
Absolutely. So I'll start with what Butler Athletics launched. They launched an initiative called Be United. And Be United, it kind of serves as this like umbrella term. And underneath that umbrella, you know, there's opportunities in leadership, volunteer work, educational experiences. And Be United, it's also this like sense of community, one title that, you know, describes unity in sport. And so that's kind of like one part. And then taking that further, business students at Butler, we have a unique opportunity to create a company with the help of a Butler loan. So myself, along with 5 other students, we created the company called Be United Ambassadors. And our company goal was to bring that Be United initiative started in athletics to the whole campus, you know, the Butler community, and even beyond that with alumni and Butler family. And given our short amount of selling time, as well as COVID restrictions, we sold about $3,500 worth of Be United merchandise. And we decided right at the beginning we were going to donate all of our profits, and RISE was one of the organizations that we chose. And I think it's important also to note that, you know, for us, it wasn't the dollar amount necessarily that we were going to donate. It was taking the leadership voice started in athletics and spreading those goals to the rest of campus. I think that's what true leadership outside of sport looks like, and what being an ally looks like for me.
For you personally, what inspired you to get involved with this at this particular time? Did your involvement predate? You know, we had this concurrent crisis of the coronavirus and then this racial justice crisis. So what really inspired you personally to get involved in this type of movement and try to change things?
Yeah, I would say, you know, after the murder of George Floyd and the events and conversations that presumed after that, I was kind of blown away with how little I understood and how little I knew. I think, you know, that is privilege, that is a lack of education for me growing up. And so I, for a while, was kind of stuck with, you know, how can I be an ally? You know, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to do something. And so I think when Butler Athletics launched this initiative, I really wanted to take it head on. And so myself, along with those 5 other teammates in the business school, that was kind of us saying, hey, we want to do something for the rest of campus and really start to make an impact.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Lewis, what has the Boys and Girls Club been doing to try to address some of the issues that we've been discussing, you know, that are affecting our communities? What are some of the activities that your organization has undertaken?
Yeah, so again, we've opened up our spaces for e-learning hub for the community to come in and access our space, access our technology, access the Wi-Fi. additionally, we made sure that folks can come to our space to get meals. Like, folks are hurting, they're hungry, income is down. And so we've made sure that they can come there and get decent meals. And not only during the week, on the weekend, we send our kids home with meals to ensure, again, that they're comfortable and they're taken care of when they're not in the care of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis. As we talk about the justices of the community, Boys and Girls Clubs of Indianapolis didn't have to jump on the bandwagon and start talking about police brutality, inequities, none of that stuff. We've been having those conversations for many of years, specifically because we serve over 90% Black and brown kids. And so these are conversations that we're having with our youth every time they come into our space.
That's really needed. Thank you. I'd like to ask you, and I'm going to proceed to ask the rest of the panelists also, but to try to get a little more personal, we have a little bit of time to talk on that level. And have you, in your work or in your personal life or growing up, have you had any experiences with systemic racism? Maybe you didn't recognize it at the time, but when you look back later. For me personally, I remember we were talking about housing earlier, and I grew up living in rented homes, and I was quite into my adulthood when I was able to buy a home, and I was really glad to do so and thankful. And then years later, I was like, wow, that was a messed up loan they gave you. Like, they charge you a lot of extra money. And lo and behold, African Americans are more likely to be shoved into loans with bad terms. So that was one of my experiences with systemic racism. How about you? Have you had any of those experiences within or without athletics?
I will say that I've experienced this my entire life. African-American female with the name Maggie Ann. And so when I started applying for positions, I'd send my resume, I'd get the interview scheduled, I'd show up, and then the response to people seeing that Maggie Ann was a person of color threw them off. And they would acknowledge, oh, you're not the person that I thought you were. So I've dealt with that for many years, just my name in itself.
Wow. That brings to mind a study. There have been a lot of studies done about names that sound Black. Me as Jesse Washington, they know I'm Black before I'm coming. And you are less likely to get a call back from an interview, even with better qualifications, if your name is Lakeisha or Jamal, than it is if it's Greg or something similar. Corey, I'd like to come back to you. You know, Notre Dame, elite education, NFL experience. What have been some of your experiences with systemic racism?
I think education-wise, you know, walking into a lot of classrooms and you're judged before, you know, you even sit down. You know,
you're a Black athlete.
Yeah, it's been across the board, and I do a lot of mentoring, and now, you know, in the business world as well, going to see different schools, going to see different setups, and it's really sad, and it's really disheartening that so many school systems are just not on the same page. And, you know, I can talk forever about it. I don't want to put up all the time, but I think that's one of those big things when we talk about resources that really makes me passionate about, you know, being from South Side of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. What was it like being a Black athlete on the campus of an elite, predominantly white, I might even say overwhelmingly white university like Notre Dame? What was that experience like?
It was a bit of an adjustment. I'll say that. I mean, you had to learn quickly how to navigate. It's a different world, right? So now, you know, I'm not in Chicago. You know, you're getting the best of the best from all over the nation and all over the world. You have to learn how to adapt and adjust very quickly. But I learned how to adapt and adjust very quickly growing up in Chicago, because as you go from neighborhood to neighborhood, you have to learn to adapt and adjust. So it was just different. And it was a lot for me to learn, and a lot for me to take on, and a lot for me to understand, because, you know, you have a university saying one thing, you talk about the equality and the fairness and how we make such a great environment, but it's like, for who though? You know, and it's, you know, we all have our blinders on and our biases. So a lot of people won't understand where you're coming from. So it was a very difficult adjustment and a journey, but I mean, I can walk into any room now and adapt and adjust from it, but it was not easy. It was not easy at all.
I think that's an important point that you made there, among all the good points that you had about dealing with these difficult situations and what you bring out of it, you came out stronger with more abilities having gone through that fire. So hopefully all of our young people will recognize that, yes, we're not downplaying any of the difficulties that you have, but use that to learn from, and you'll come out with abilities and skills that other people may not have. Dr. Gregg, in your decades of experience in athletics, athletic administration, as an athlete, are there any particular examples of systemic racism that stand out for you?
Well, there's several, and again, I won't get into all of them. I'd like to piggyback on what Corey said, and having gone to Vanderbilt University, I'm a lot older than him, obviously, and so, but back then I was part of what we called a guinea pig class. It was the first time they'd ever brought that many African Americans in one class to play on a football team.
How many?
There were 12 of us, which is
I don't mean to laugh, but
right.
To think that 12 is a lot of Black athletes to have on a football team is amusing at this point.
Absolutely. There were 12 of us, so there were more of us in that one class than I think that were on the team in total, or maybe around the same amount. And so going from some of the backgrounds we came from, I came up in a semi-broken home, single mom at a portion of time, those types of things that some of us come up in, and going to Vanderbilt University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, not just the nation, but the socioeconomic status of those kids that we went to school with. That was almost more of a culture shock than just the race issue. So when I went to school, and I told a board at a board meeting, I said this, one of my last board meetings at Tulsa, I stood up and I said, you know, when I went to Vanderbilt University, I had three things. I had a football scholarship, I had a Pell Grant, and I had a car that my mom found the week before I went to school that would last my whole time through college. Okay, but I was going to college with kids who drove Corvettes and Maseratis and those types of things, and you don't dwell on those types of things, but that's what I was talking about, some of the inequities that you come into a situation with. And I think being a student athlete, it makes you resilient, it makes you patient, you pay your dues, you embrace it. And that's some of the great things that come out of that. So again, like Corey said, now I can stand here 29, 30 years later and hold my own in those boardrooms with the billionaires and the presidents and the deans and the vice presidents and those types of people who are in those rooms.
That's a great point. And I had a similar experience at Yale University, just never really encountering that kind of wealth before, and taking a while to adjust to it. But, you know, I really want to emphasize to the young people, you know, we feel you, those of you who are in difficult situations, we feel you, we've been there, but you have something that's really a gift. You have a resilience and a grit and a fluency across disciplines and environments that some of your colleagues may lack. And so hold on to that and be proud of it. Don't shrink from it. It'll do you well. Rihanna, I don't want to exclude you from the systemic racism conversation just because you're white. And so I'm interested on your perspective. You may have experienced it from afar, or maybe you know, recognized it later. So what type of observations do you have about systemic racism in our environments, our school, our university, things like that?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm obviously white. I grew up in a very small farm town in the middle of Wisconsin. So my community is not diverse, and my school, my high school, and you know, K through 12 education in my community is really not diverse. So, you know, therefore my personal experience with the effects of systemic racism in education is really the lack of education I received on topics like oppression. What is that? What does it look like? How do we see it? Racism beyond, you know, slavery in history class, right? The difference between equity versus equality. I never had opportunities like this until I got to Butler. So, you know, I think it is just amazing that RISE has been having conversations and learning experiences like this for all of us young people and adults alike. I think a lot of schools are missing that piece, especially in areas with more prominent privileged social identities.
Nice. Maggie, what role do you think sports might play as a whole in addressing some of the inequities that we've been discussing in this session?
So I think what sports do, it allows all of us to come together with a common with a common purpose, if you will. When you put a team together and they're motivated to win and they're bonding together, it creates a safe space for us to have some difficult, challenging conversations and to be real and honest in a safe place.
Mm. Well said. Dr. Gregg, what do you think? How can sports help move society forward in this moment that we're in?
Well, I'm very proud of today's athletes, and we have the pro athletes and the college student athletes, and they all recognize, I think, their importance in the movement. When I was a student athlete at Vanderbilt, we didn't have the voice that the athletes have today. And so, but on the pro side, I like to point at, obviously, LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, who basically gave his whole career to the movement and helped start some of these things before everyone else got involved. And it's kind of like a throwback to me, to Muhammad Ali, who's a hero of mine, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, Arthur Ashe, those types of people who moved the needle on the social justice side back then. So now it's good to see that it's kind of come full circle, and people didn't forget some of the struggles and some of the shoulders that we stand on today, people who gave it all to help us. And so I think, absolutely everybody knows how popular sports is, but now I think at least the athletes are starting to realize with that popularity comes a platform, and they can get out messages that everyone needs to hear.
Yeah, because we had a few barren years there where athletes were about that dollar and not necessarily about justice. But in their defense, the rest of the country was going through a rather greedy era in the 80s and the early 90s also. But I'm also very encouraged and heartened by the activism that I see, not only among the big names, but everybody has a platform. Young people, you all have platforms too. You have a community that you can affect by your leadership and your deeds and your words. So please recognize that and use it as you see fit. I'd like to conclude this section of our program and this discussion by asking Rihanna and Corey, you guys are the youngest amongst the crew. And so what do you think young people can do specifically to help change some of the problems that we have outlined here today? What can young people do?
So I think young people need to understand the impact and influence of voice and action. To be honest, I was super hesitant to be a part of this panel. I couldn't help but question my value, thinking there are so many people with more accolades and accomplishments or at a higher level in their profession than I am. But I quickly realized that taking part in this, that's the whole point for young people and young leaders. You don't have to win championships or podium at conference. You don't have to follow a certain career path or have reached a certain level in your profession in order to do and say something that's meaningful. To be a great leader is to have great character and values, and it's what leaders do with the privileges and platforms that they do have, and that looks different for everyone. So I guess just to wrap that all up, anyone can make all the difference, no matter how small your voice or your actions may seem. It just takes work, and it takes getting out of your comfort zone.
Corey, what do you think? What's your advice to the young folks out there?
I say to the young people, use the technology and use that wealth that you have. And that wealth you have right now is time. It's on your side. God willing, it's on your time. So use it wisely, especially everybody who's on a university campus right now. And if you're a student athlete, you get to go, your name carries some weight. That means you can go talk to the president. You can go talk to prominent alumni. You can go talk to board of trustees. You can talk to all these people that you see walking by every day that you take for granted. And I say that as somebody who took people walking by every day for granted in college, because I was tired, because I was going to class, because I'm thinking, oh, they'll always be there, right? They're always going to be there. Well, they're not, because one day they're going to kick you out. They say your scholarship is done or your time here is done, you graduated, you got to go out into the real world. So take advantage of all those prominent people now that you can touch and talk to and make something happen. Those organizations that are all across campus, go to those meetings, email, or whatever the case may be. Social distance, I know it's a little difficult now and a little different now, but get involved. All of these local organizations, Boys and Girls Club, go get involved. Go talk to these kids. Go get involved with them. Find out what some of their needs are. Maybe you're not the person that's in the front, the leader, be in the back. I'm a person that likes to work behind the scenes too. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you're a person that can introduce somebody to somebody else. Maybe you're a person that introduces a local organization to the university and they collaborate from there. But the thing is to get involved. It takes action. You can't just talk about it or tweet about it or put a post about it, set your phone down and pat yourself on your back, because yeah, you did something, but you didn't get the ball really moving. So it's really about action and being consistent every day with it.
And can I add something to that?
Please do, yes.
I absolutely applaud Rihanna and Corey. First of all, I tell people all the time, I talk to a lot of student athletes, movements are led by young people. And, you know, I'm an old guy now, I'm 51. I remember when the Boys and Girls Club was just a boys club, and then the girls club was down the street. So I'm a little dated, but we will follow the youth. And Martin Luther King Jr. was only 26 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott back in the 50s. And what he brought from that perspective in the sit-ins, those were college students, okay? So understand your importance, understand your worth, and understand your voice.
Man, that is so inspiring from the three of you. And one of my big takeaways is that you are all leaders. We are all leaders. We don't need to be a celebrity. We don't need to have a gabillion followers. Everybody can make an impact in some way. And we may have a responsibility to make an impact in order to help others. I'd like to address some questions now from the audience. And so I would like to start, excuse me as I read from my phone here, but I guess that we're allowed to do that in 2020 now. Dr. Gregg, since you're up on screen, how can the NCAA better support student athletes who want to be more active advocates for racial justice? How can the NCAA better support them?
That's a great question. That's actually part of our 8-point plan in the inclusion area. And the voice of the student athlete, very important right now. I talk to a lot of coaches and administrators and student athletes about them, again, using the voice that they have. So if you have student athletes who are very interested in this, they can go through the conference office and obviously give us a call directly. When I was at Tulsa a few months ago, I chaired the Racial Equality Action Group for the conference, and we had a lot of discussions with the student athletes. We had a lot of discussions with the student athletes there on campus, and we listened to their concerns, and we also mapped out action steps based on what they wanted to do, not just what we wanted to do. So make sure that you get in contact with our office at the Ncaa or through your conference, and we can have those types of conversations and help with some guidance. But again, know your importance and know your voice.
That's terrific. Maggie, here's the question. Is there more that you think organizations like yours can do to continue supporting students who are disadvantaged by the educational system? So I would like to rephrase that. If a 1-year $1 billion grant fell out of the sky upon your Boys and Girls Club organization, and you had unlimited funds to address some of these problems in a concentrated period of time, cost notwithstanding, what do you think organizations could do more of or better?
Serve more youth. And so we often find ourselves in a position where we can't invite more youth into our space. We are often getting calls where people are asking us to put a Boys and Girls Club in their community for their kids to have a safe place. 1, just to be kids. 2, to have mentorship. 3, to get that tutoring that they need. 4, to get those meals. And so not only do we create a safe environment for kids to be kids, we're hoping to instill character. We're hoping to build youth, or not build, empower youth to become good, solid citizens. And so again, just create a space, more spaces for us to serve more youth in our community. They can't get enough mentorship. They can't get enough of having an adult in their life that truly cares for them and are interested in what they're doing each and every day.
Build more centers. Well, I've been to a lot of Boys and Girls Clubs across the country, and we could absolutely use more of them. They're a tremendous resource. So Ford Foundation, Mellon Foundation, y'all hear the lady? Let's get to it. This is for anybody, but I guess I'll ask Corey. So you've come through quite an educational experience. And looking back on it, what type of policy do you think that we should enact to make education more equitable?
I think it starts with recruiting and trying to find those students that do want a different education. I think it's really not harder than that. It starts with recruiting and taking the time to find those students. And I think it should be more than just trying to fill a quota, which oftentimes it is. You get a certain percentage of students of this race, or certain percentage of students that are socioeconomic status. But I think if it's like one of those things, put your money where your mouth is the recruiting aspect, because kids from the South Side, Notre Dame, it's a beautiful campus, but as far as the makeup of it, it can be intimidating. You're walking to a completely different situation than you go into like University of Illinois. You go into a public school and it's a lot more people that from your background. But I think it's challenging these students to step out of their comfort zone. And I think that starts first and foremost with recruiting.
Maggie, what type of education policy do you think we should change? What do you see kids that come into the Boys and Girls Clubs needing in order to really reach an equity in their education?
Access to quality schools. And so oftentimes neighborhood school is not the best school for that child. And so I think it's so important that policymakers ensures that all of our kids have access to a quality education. And we should not policymakers shouldn't define what type of school it is, whether it's a charter school, a private school, what have you. We just need to ensure that our kiddos have access to quality education, and the best education that is the best education for that child.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Gregg, I will give the final answer to you, please. Education policy changes to increase equity. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. We have to focus on literacy, and not just our students going to schools, but what are they getting out of them? One of the important programs from the Ncaa is the Readers Become Leaders program. And I give Victor Hill and a lot of other people in the Ncaa office the credit for building that program, providing children with access. That was the word that was used, expanding classrooms and school libraries through donations, those types of things. So again, it's a way of using sport, but to also help enhance on the educational side. And I tell people all the time, yeah, sports is important, but literacy is much more important. And we have to concentrate on that, make sure that these students are equipped and prepared to go on to a Notre Dame or Florida A&M or a Tennessee State or a Vanderbilt. And again, and it's like what you said, schools have to be intentional with the recruiting. The money is out there, and in particular right now, what's going on with social justice. Students who are on this call, pay attention to that. There are schools out there, there are foundations that are looking to do some things on the equity and equality side. So pay close attention to that, and keep your focus and your attention on your education.
Thank you. Well, so many great insights and points. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. McIntosh for the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Thank you very much, panelists. Really, phenomenal discussion about education, its intersection with sport, and how we address systemic racism. I really want to piggyback on something that Derek Gregg said around, not just access, but literacy, and how we approach what we are able to do, and how we approach quality education and preparing our citizens, quite frankly, for their futures in society. If we expand the concept of literacy beyond simply reading and writing and translate it into functional literacy, and equipping people with the skills that they need to survive and to navigate society, I think, as a society as a whole, our institutions and our educational system especially needs to be geared and equipped to make sure that the students are being prepared with those skills that they need. Rihanna Walzer talks about having empathy, recognizing that the power that you have, having an understanding of our historical context. And we began with the concepts and notions of equality versus equity for this very reason. All of us need to have a better understanding of where we are as a society. All of us need to have a better understanding of, what we've gone through this year in 2020. I think it has been an especially busy year. It has been an especially challenging year. If we think about COVID-19, we think about our reckoning as it relates to racial equity and social justice. But the one thing that I think I've taken away more than anything else is that it has been challenging for us in different ways. For some of us, it has been challenging financially. For some of us, it has been challenging from a health perspective. But some of us have thrived in some scenarios. And we've certainly seen that as we approach the needs of the society, we have to take into account, we have to take into consideration what makes us different, what sets us apart, and similarly begin to have equal outcomes in our minds for everyone, so that even though there is that consideration of our differences, we need to do that if everybody is to be successful. So again, we want to thank Jesse Washington for moderating. Thank you, Dr. Greg, Brianna Walzer, Corey Mays, Maggie Lewis. Thanks so much for being a part of this conversation. We think it's an important one. For us at RISE, this is the start. We specifically reached out to you because we have relationships with you, and we want to continue to grow these relationships into 2021. As collectively, we begin the work of trying to improve the city of Indianapolis, especially for the youth, who, as I said, Dr. Williams once said, have the future of the nation in their book bags. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Really wonderful conversation. We hope to see you soon as you engage with us at RISE or any of our other partners